The morning sun was just starting to warm the private airport when Dr. Michelle Thompson's black Tesla Model X pulled into the parking lot. It was 7:15 a.m. on a Tuesday, and she was right on time for her private flight to Boston. The car's sleek surface reflected the golden sunlight as she parked in front of the private aviation terminal. Dr. Thompson checked her appearance one last time in the car's mirror. At 38 years old, she carried herself with the confidence that came from years of success in the medical and business worlds. Her dark hair was neatly pulled back in a professional bun, and her navy blue business suit was perfectly pressed. She had chosen to dress formally today because she would be heading straight to an important medical conference from the airport. As the CEO of Thompson Biotechnology, a company worth billions of dollars, Michelle had started using private jets 6 months ago. It wasn't about luxury, it was about saving time. Her company was growing fast, and she needed to be in different cities almost every week. Regular commercial flights just couldn't keep up with her busy schedule anymore. She stepped out of her car, and the cool morning air felt refreshing against her face. Her heels clicked against the pavement as she walked to the trunk to get her bags. She had packed light. Just one small suitcase and her laptop bag containing her presentation for the Harvard Medical School Symposium. The private terminal was much quieter than the main airport building. Through the large glass windows, Michelle could see 3 private jets parked on the tarmac. One of them, a sleek Cessna Citation, was the one she had chartered for her flight to Boston. She had specifically chosen a 7:30 a.m. departure to avoid morning traffic in both cities. As she walked toward the terminal entrance, Michelle noticed several other passengers coming and going. A middle-aged white couple was being escorted to their jet by a smiling staff member. An older white man in a golf shirt was sitting in the waiting area, typing on his phone. Everything seemed normal and peaceful, just another morning at the private aviation terminal. Michelle checked her phone again, reviewing her day's schedule. After landing in Boston at 9:45 a.m., she would head straight to the medical conference where she was the keynote speaker. Her presentation about her company's new cancer treatment breakthrough was saved safely on both her laptop and in the cloud. Everything was perfectly planned and organized, just the way she liked it. The automatic doors slid open smoothly as she approached the terminal entrance. The air conditioning inside was a bit too cold, making her glad she had her suit jacket on. The lobby smelled of fresh coffee, and soft classical music played in the background. This was why she preferred private aviation. Everything was always clean, quiet, and efficient. 2 security guards stood at their posts near the check-in counter. The one on the left, a younger man with sandy blonde hair and a name tag that read Officer Barrett, was watching her with an expression she had seen too many times before. Michelle took a deep breath, keeping her professional smile in place. After 15 years of breaking barriers in the medical and business worlds, she had learned to handle these situations with grace. She reached into her bag for her digital boarding documents, already pulled up on her phone. Her pilot had sent them last night, along with a weather update and flight plan. As she walked toward the security checkpoint, Michelle had no idea that the next 30 minutes would turn into one of the most challenging and ultimately triumphant moments of her career. The morning had started so normally, just like any other business trip. But sometimes, the most important moments in life come when we least expect them. And for Dr. Michelle Thompson, this ordinary Tuesday morning was about to become anything but ordinary. Not just for her, but for everyone who would witness what was about to happen at Gate 3 of the private aviation terminal. Officer James Barrett had been working at the private aviation terminal for 3 years. He took pride in knowing all the regular passengers and keeping the terminal exclusive. When he saw Dr. Michelle Thompson approaching his security checkpoint, his face immediately showed disapproval. "Excuse me, ma'am," Barrett called out loudly, holding up his hand in a stop gesture. "The main terminal is that way." He pointed toward the regular airport building, not even bothering to look at the documents in Michelle's hand. His voice was loud enough that several people in the waiting area turned to watch. Michelle kept her professional smile in place, though her heart was beating faster. She had dealt with similar situations before, but it never got easier. "Good morning, Officer Barrett," she said calmly, reading his name tag. "I have my boarding documents right here for the 7:30 a.m. flight to Boston." Barrett crossed his arms and looked at her Tesla parked outside, then back at her. "This is a private aviation terminal," he said slowly, as if talking to a child. "These flights cost thousands of dollars. Are you sure you're in the right place?" Behind him, his fellow security guard looked uncomfortable but remained silent. Just then, a white businessman walked through the checkpoint. Barrett barely glanced at his documents before waving him through with a friendly "Have a good flight, sir." The contrast in treatment was obvious to everyone watching. Michelle took another deep breath and held up her phone, showing her digital boarding pass. "Yes, I'm quite sure. As you can see, I'm the primary passenger on flight CX 247 to Boston. My pilot confirmed everything last night." Barrett hardly looked at the screen. "Anyone can make a fake document on their phone," he said dismissively. "I'm going to need to see some real proof that you belong here." His hand moved to rest on his security radio, a subtle threat that he could call for backup. The situation was getting more tense by the second. Other passengers had stopped to watch, some looking embarrassed, others pulling out their phones to record. Mitchell noticed a young Asian woman behind the check-in counter watching with concern while typing something on her computer. "Officer Barrett," Michelle tried again, her voice still professional but firmer now. "I understand you're doing your job, but I've shown you my valid boarding documents. What additional proof would you like to see?" She opened her purse, ready to show her ID, though she noticed he hadn't asked for identification from any other passengers. Barrett smirked. "Look, ma'am, I've worked here for years. I know what our usual passengers look like. Maybe you're lost, or maybe someone sent you on an errand. But unless you can prove you're supposed to be here, I'm going to have to ask you to leave." The insult was clear in his voice. A few gasps came from the people watching. Michelle felt her cheeks grow warm, not from embarrassment but from controlled anger. She had worked too hard and achieved too much to be treated this way. "I'd like to speak to your supervisor," Michelle said quietly but firmly. She pulled out her business card, the one with her company's logo and her title as CEO. But before she could hand it to him, Barrett took a step forward, his body language becoming more aggressive. "Listen here," he started, his voice getting louder. "I don't care what kind of card you have. This is a private terminal, and I say you don't belong here. Now, you can either head to the main terminal on your own, or I can call security to escort you." The irony of a security guard threatening to call security wasn't lost on Michelle. She noticed more phones being raised to record the incident, and the young Asian woman at the counter was now speaking urgently into a phone. What Barrett didn't know was that Dr. Michelle Thompson had faced bigger challenges than him on her way to becoming a CEO. And in the next few minutes, he was about to learn a lesson about making assumptions that he would never forget. The tension in the private terminal continued to grow. Dr. Michelle Thompson stood her ground, holding her business card in one hand and her phone in the other. Around her, the morning buzz of the terminal had gone quiet. Everyone was watching the scene unfold between her and Officer Barrett. Sarah Chen, the flight operations coordinator behind the counter, had seen enough. She quietly picked up her phone and sent a quick text to Captain Roberts, who was doing his pre-flight checks on Dr. Thompson's chartered jet. "Emergency at security checkpoint. CEO passenger being harassed by guard. Please come now." Barrett was getting more frustrated by the second. He didn't like that this woman wasn't backing down. "Ma'am, I've been more than patient," he said, his face turning red. "I don't care what kind of fake business card you have. This is my checkpoint, and I make the decisions here." Mitchell noticed an elderly white couple walking past her to the checkpoint. Barrett immediately smiled at them, checked their papers with a quick glance, and waved them through. "Have a wonderful flight, folks," he said cheerfully. Then his face hardened again as he turned back to Michelle. "That's enough," Michelle said firmly. "Your behavior is completely unprofessional. Not only are you refusing to properly check my valid documents, but you're also clearly treating other passengers differently." She pulled out her driver's license and held it next to her boarding pass. "Here's my ID that matches my boarding documents." Barrett barely looked at them. "Could be fake too. You people think you can just walk in anywhere these days." His words carried an ugly meaning that made several onlookers gasp. One man in a business suit shook his head in disgust and started filming with his phone. Michelle felt her heart pounding, but years of dealing with prejudice had taught her to stay calm. "What exactly do you mean by you people, Officer Barrett?" she asked, making sure her voice was clear enough to be heard on all the videos being recorded. The young security guard next to Barrett finally spoke up. "James, maybe we should just check her ID properly," but Barrett cut him off with a sharp look. "Stay out of this, Mike," Barrett snapped. I've been doing this job since before you got here. I know how to spot people who don't belong. He turned back to Michelle. Ma'am, this is your last warning. Leave now, or I'm calling for backup. Michelle took out her phone and pressed a number on speed dial. Barrett laughed. Go ahead, call whoever you want. It won't change anything here. The terminal doors opened, and more passengers came in. They quickly sensed the tension and stopped to watch. Sarah Chen was still recording everything from behind her counter, her hand shaking slightly as she documented the unfolding discrimination. Yes, this is Dr. Thompson. Michelle spoke clearly into her phone. I'm at the security checkpoint. Could you please come to the terminal? It seems there's some confusion about my flight. Her voice was steady, professional, and confident. Barrett rolled his eyes. Oh, now you're pretending to be a doctor too. This just keeps getting better. His sarcasm was thick and ugly. Next you'll tell me you own the plane. What Barrett didn't know was that Michelle's call wasn't just to anyone. In the next few minutes, his whole world was about to turn upside down. Through the terminal windows, several people could see Captain Roberts quickly walking toward the building, followed by the aviation company's regional manager. The morning sun was now streaming fully through the terminal's glass walls, and in that bright light, everyone could clearly see what was happening. But the light was about to shine on something else too, the truth about who Dr. Michelle Thompson really was, and the consequences of judging someone by the color of their skin. Sarah Chen's hands were shaking slightly as she continued recording the scene from behind her counter. In her 3 years working at the private terminal, she had never seen such obvious discrimination. Her phone's memory was getting full, but she knew this footage was too important to stop recording. Through the terminal's large windows, Sarah could see Captain David Roberts walking quickly from the tarmac. Behind him was Mr. Anderson, the regional manager of the aviation company, his face serious as he spoke into his phone. The help that Dr. Thompson had called for was arriving, but Officer Barrett was too busy with his power trip to notice. I've had enough of this game, Barrett said, reaching for his radio. I'm calling security to remove you. He seemed to have forgotten that he was security, and his behavior was becoming more erratic as he felt his authority being challenged. Just then, the terminal doors opened. Captain Roberts walked in, his uniform crisp and professional. Dr. Thompson, he called out warmly. We've been waiting for you. Is there a problem here? His voice carried the natural authority that came with 20 years of flying experience. Barrett's face froze in mid-reach for his radio. He looked back and forth between the pilot and Michelle, confusion replacing his arrogant expression. Before he could speak, Mr. Anderson walked in behind the pilot. Dr. Thompson, my sincere apologies for this delay, Mr. Anderson said, glaring at Barrett. Your jet is ready, and we've already loaded the medical presentation materials you sent ahead for the Harvard Symposium. The color drained from Barrett's face as he began to realize his mistake, but the real shock was still coming. Michelle spoke calmly, her voice carrying across the now silent terminal. Thank you, Captain Roberts. Mr. Anderson, I believe we need to have a serious discussion about security protocols at this facility. She turned to face Barrett directly, especially since my company completed the purchase of this aviation service last month. Several people in the terminal let out surprised gasps. Sarah Chen's mouth dropped open as she realized what this meant. Dr. Thompson wasn't just a passenger. She was effectively the owner of the entire operation. Barrett's face went from pale to sickly gray. You own, he stammered, unable to complete his sentence. Yes, Officer Barrett, Michelle said, her voice firm but not unkind. Thompson Biotechnology acquired this aviation company 4 weeks ago. I'm not just a passenger, I'm your boss's boss's boss. The young security guard who had tried to intervene earlier looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. Other passengers were still recording, and Sarah knew this incident would be all over social media within hours. Mr. Anderson stepped forward. Officer Barrett, please turn in your badge and radio. Your employment is terminated, effective immediately. His voice was quiet but final. Barrett's hands trembled as he unpinned his badge. The man who had been so powerful and arrogant just minutes ago now looked small and defeated. Several onlookers nodded in approval as he placed his badge and radio on the counter. As Barrett walked toward the exit, Michelle called out, Officer Barrett. He turned, his face a mix of shame and fear. I hope this experience teaches you something valuable about judging people based on their appearance. Sarah watched as Dr. Thompson was finally escorted to her jet by Captain Roberts and Mr. Anderson. The other passengers in the terminal broke into spontaneous applause. Some came forward to shake Michelle's hand, while others apologized for not speaking up sooner. As the morning sun filled the terminal with light, Sarah stopped her recording and saved it carefully. She knew that what she had witnessed wasn't just about one security guard's prejudice being exposed. It was about justice, dignity, and the changing face of success in America. Looking through the terminal windows, Sarah could see Dr. Thompson walking toward her jet, her head held high. The morning's ugly incident had revealed something beautiful: the power of grace under pressure, and the swift justice that sometimes comes when people show their true colors. The video of what happened at the private aviation terminal spread across social media like wildfire. Sarah Chen's recording, along with videos from other witnesses, had been viewed millions of times within just 24 hours. The story was picked up by major news networks, and soon Dr. Michelle Thompson's experience became a national talking point. Back in her office at Thompson Biotechnology headquarters, Michelle sat watching the coverage on multiple news channels. Her phone hadn't stopped buzzing with messages of support from other business leaders, civil rights activists, and thousands of ordinary people inspired by her dignity under pressure. Dr. Thompson, her assistant Jennifer, walked in with a tablet. The aviation company's board of directors is on line one. They want to discuss implementing immediate changes to their security training programs. She paused before adding, "And Good Morning America called again. They really want you to share your story." Michelle took a sip of her coffee, thinking carefully about her next steps. This incident could be more than just another viral moment of racism being exposed. It could be an opportunity for real change. Meanwhile, at the private terminal, things were very different from the day before. Mr. Anderson had called an emergency staff meeting. Sarah Chen sat in the front row, still processing her role in documenting the incident. The room was packed with employees from every department. "Yesterday's incident was unacceptable," Mr. Anderson began, his voice serious. "But thanks to Ms. Chen's quick thinking in recording the situation and alerting the flight crew, we have a clear record of what happened." He nodded at Sarah, who received supportive looks from her colleagues. The young security guard who had tried to stop Barrett, Mike Wilson, raised his hand. "Sir, I knew what Officer Barrett was doing was wrong, but I didn't step in forcefully enough. I'd like to apologize to Dr. Thompson personally." Back in her office, Michelle was making decisions that would affect thousands of people. She pulled up a new email and began typing. Subject: Creating change from challenge. The email would go out to every employee of both Thompson Biotechnology and the aviation company. Yesterday's incident highlighted a problem that exists not just in our aviation division, but across many industries, she wrote. Today, we begin a new chapter. We're launching a comprehensive training program to address bias at every level of our operations. The responses started coming in immediately. Other companies in the aviation industry reached out, wanting to learn more about implementing similar training programs. Civil rights organizations offered to help develop the curriculum. Business schools asked permission to use the incident as a case study. At the terminal, Sarah Chen was surprised to receive a personal email from Dr. Thompson, asking her to join a new committee that would oversee the implementation of anti-bias policies. Her hands shook as she read the message, remembering how her own experiences with prejudice had made her quick to recognize and document what was happening to Dr. Thompson. By the end of the day, the story had evolved from a viral video into something more meaningful. News anchors were discussing not just what happened, but what companies could do to prevent similar incidents. Social media was filled with people sharing their own experiences and praising Dr. Thompson's response. Michelle's phone buzzed again. This time it was a message from a young black girl in high school. "Dr. Thompson, watching you handle that situation with such grace showed me what's possible. I want to be a CEO like you someday." Looking out her office window at the setting sun, Michelle smiled. Sometimes the worst moments could lead to the best changes. She opened her laptop and began working on a new initiative, a scholarship program for minority students interested in business and aviation careers. The incident with Officer Barrett could have been just another discouraging example of prejudice. Instead, because of how everyone involved chose to respond, it was becoming a catalyst for positive change. As Michelle often told her employees, it's not just about what happens to you, it's about what you do with what happens to you. 1 week after the incident, the private aviation terminal looked very different. New signs hung on the walls reading "Welcome All" and "Respect First." Every employee wore a new badge that included the words "Committed to Equality" beneath their name and position. Sarah Chen arrived at work that morning feeling proud of the changes she was seeing. As she walked through the terminal, she noticed the new training session happening in the main conference room. Through the glass walls, she could see Mike Wilson, the young security guard, leading a discussion with a diverse group of new employees. "Remember what we learned from the Barrett incident," Mike was saying to the group. "Our job is to ensure safety while treating every person with respect. We check documents, not assumptions." The new trainees were taking notes, and Sarah noticed how different this was from the old training sessions that focused only on security protocols. Dr. Michelle Thompson's schedule was busier than ever. Today, she was back at the same terminal, but this time she wasn't alone. A group of high school students from diverse backgrounds surrounded her, all wearing Future Aviation Leaders badges. "This is where it happened," Michelle told the students, standing at the exact spot where Barrett had tried to block her. "But instead of focusing on the negative, look at what's growing from it." She gestured to the transformed terminal, now staffed with people of all backgrounds. The students looked around in amazement. One girl, Maria Rodriguez, raised her hand. "Dr. Thompson, my parents clean offices at night. Sometimes people treat them like they don't belong in the buildings where they work. Your story gave them courage to speak up when someone disrespects them." Michelle smiled warmly at Maria. "That's exactly why we're here today. Each of you has been chosen for our new scholarship program. You'll learn every aspect of the aviation business, from flying planes to running operations." Mr. Anderson walked up to the group, looking much more relaxed than he had a week ago. "Dr. Thompson, the new security team is ready for your inspection." Behind him stood 6 new security officers, men and women of different races and ages, all specially trained in the new protocols. Meanwhile, across town, former Officer Barrett sat in a small apartment, watching a news report about the changes at his old workplace. The reporter was interviewing Sarah Chen about the new training program she helped design. "We're teaching people to look at credentials, not color," Sarah explained on TV. What happened to Dr. Thompson was wrong, but her response is changing the whole industry. Barrett switched off the TV and looked at the job applications on his table. Each one now required completion of bias training. Back at the terminal, Michelle was showing the students the private jet she used. Captain Roberts stood by the plane, explaining how the engines worked to the fascinated teenagers. "Who wants to sit in the cockpit?" he asked, and every hand shot up excitedly. As Michelle watched the students climb aboard, her phone buzzed with a new message. It was from the National Aviation Association. "Dr. Thompson, your new training program has been approved as the standard for all private aviation facilities nationwide." Sarah approached Michelle with a tablet showing the latest statistics. "Dr. Thompson, our customer satisfaction ratings have gone up 40% since the changes, and applications from minority candidates have tripled." Looking around the terminal, Michelle saw something beautiful happening. The place that had tried to exclude her was now becoming a model of inclusion. Young people who might never have dreamed of working in aviation were seeing new possibilities for their futures. "Ms. Chen," Michelle turned to Sarah, "would you like to tell the students your story? About how one person's courage to record what's wrong can help make things right?" As Sarah began sharing her experience with the eager students, Michelle thought about how much had changed in just 1 week. The terminal that had been a place of discrimination was transforming into a symbol of progress. And it all started because people chose to stand up for what was right. 1 month after the incident, Dr. Michelle Thompson stood on a stage at the National Business Leadership Conference. The huge hall was packed with CEOs, business leaders, and young entrepreneurs from across the country. The screen behind her showed the now famous video of her encounter with Officer Barrett. "What you just watched wasn't just about one person's prejudice," Michelle said to the silent audience. "It was about the choice we all have when facing discrimination, to let it break us down, or to use it to build something better." In the front row, Sarah Chen sat with her new team from the Equality in Aviation Initiative. She had been promoted to Director of Diversity and Training, and her program was already being used at 20 different airports across the country. Our story went viral, Michelle continued, but going viral isn't enough. Real change happens when we turn moments into movements. She clicked to the next slide, showing pictures of her new training center at the terminal. Among the audience was Mike Wilson, the young security guard who had tried to stop Barrett that day. He was now the head of security training, teaching others how to maintain safety while treating everyone with respect. His notebook was open, and he wrote down Michelle's words. Courage isn't just about standing up, it's about standing up and then reaching back to help others up too. Meanwhile, across the city, Barrett was sitting in a mandatory diversity training class. It was part of his requirements for his new job as a store security guard. On the screen, they were showing the incident at the terminal as an example of what not to do. Barrett sank lower in his chair, but he was listening and learning. Back at the conference, Michelle was sharing the results of their new initiatives. In just 1 month, we've given out 50 scholarships to minority students interested in aviation. We've hired 30 new employees from diverse backgrounds, and our customer satisfaction rates have never been higher. Sarah stood up to present the next part. Her voice, once shy about public speaking, was now confident. We're launching our program in 5 more cities next month, she announced. And we've created a hotline where anyone who faces discrimination can report it and get immediate help. The audience broke into applause when Michelle revealed the next big news. Thompson Biotechnology is creating a $10 million fund to help minority-owned businesses in the aviation industry, because representation matters at every level, from the security checkpoint to the boardroom. After the conference, a group of young black girls from a local high school surrounded Michelle. One of them, Jasmine, spoke up. Dr. Thompson, I saw your video and told my mom I want to be a pilot. She cried because she never thought it was possible for someone like us. Michelle hugged Jasmine. Not only is it possible, she said, but we're making sure it happens. You're looking at the first student in our new pilot training program. Jasmine's eyes lit up with joy and hope. That evening, Michelle sat in her office reviewing new applications for the scholarship program. Sarah brought in a report showing that their story had inspired other companies to start similar initiatives. It's like dropping a stone in a pond, Sarah said. The ripples just keep spreading. On Michelle's desk was a letter from an unexpected source. It was from Barrett's daughter. Dear Dr. Thompson, what you did changed my dad. He's different now. He's learning and trying to be better. Thank you for showing him a better way without hate. Looking out her window at the sunset, Michelle thought about how far they'd come in just 1 month. The terminal where she had faced discrimination was now a place where dreams were taking flight. Young people who had never seen themselves in aviation were now reaching for the sky. Dr. Thompson, her assistant, called from the door. The governor's office is on line 1. They want to discuss making our training program mandatory for all state transportation facilities. Michelle smiled as she picked up the phone. Sometimes the worst moments in life lead to the best changes, and sometimes one person standing tall can help thousands of others stand taller too. 6 months had passed since that morning at the private terminal. On a bright autumn day, Dr. Michelle Thompson stood at the podium of the newly built Thompson Aviation Academy. Behind her, a large sign read Opening Day, where dreams take flight. The parking lot was full of cars, and hundreds of people sat in chairs on the academy's front lawn. In the front row were familiar faces: Sarah Chen, now a respected leader in aviation training, Mike Wilson, who had helped transform security practices, and 50 students from the first class of the aviation program. When I faced discrimination that morning, Michelle began her speech, I could have let anger take over. Instead, we chose to build something new. She gestured to the modern building behind her. This academy isn't just about teaching people to fly planes or run airports. It's about changing who gets to be part of this industry. Among the crowd sat James Barrett, the former security guard. He had asked permission to attend, wanting to see the positive changes that came from his biggest mistake. His daughter sat beside him, now one of the scholarship students in the aviation management program. Sarah Chen stepped up to the podium next. 6 months ago, I was just someone behind a counter who saw something wrong and decided to record it. Today, our training program has been adopted by over 200 airports nationwide. The crowd applauded as she shared the statistics. Our first class includes students from every background, Sarah continued. Former janitors learning to be pilots, single mothers studying aviation management, Young people who never thought they could afford flight school, now on their way to becoming commercial pilots. In the middle of the crowd sat Jasmine, a high school student who had once thought being a pilot was impossible. Now she wore the academy's uniform, her pilot training badge shining in the sunlight. Next to her were 20 other young women from similar backgrounds, all part of the Future Female Pilots program. Michelle returned to the podium and unveiled a large screen. Let me show you what we've accomplished in 6 months. 500 new jobs created. 1,000 students enrolled in our programs. 25 airports have completely changed their security training, and 0 incidents of discrimination reported at any facility using our new protocols. The crowd stood and cheered. Among them was Mr. Anderson, now the National Director of Aviation Equality, working to spread these changes across the country. You remembered how nervous he had been that morning 6 months ago, and how proud he was now of being part of this transformation. Barrett's daughter stood up to speak next. My father's mistake taught our whole family about the damage prejudice can cause, she said bravely. But Dr. Thompson's response taught us about the power of turning pain into progress. Her father wiped tears from his eyes as she spoke. After the ceremony, Michelle walked through the academy's halls with Sarah. They passed classrooms full of students from all walks of life, learning about aviation technology, management, and flight operations. On the walls hung photos of diverse aviation pioneers, showing students that people who looked like them had been breaking barriers for generations. Dr. Thompson, Sarah said, stopping at a window overlooking the academy's private airfield. Remember when you said that morning would change everything? Did you ever imagine it would change this much? Michelle watched as a training plane took off, piloted by a student who 6 months ago had been working as a cleaning lady at the terminal. Change is like flight, Sarah, she replied. Once you get off the ground, the sky's the limit. That evening, as the sun set behind the academy, Michelle sat in her office looking at a new email. The president had invited her to the White House to discuss making her program a national standard. On her desk sat a photo from that morning 6 months ago, a reminder that sometimes the worst moments can launch the best futures. As she prepared to leave for the day, Michelle saw Barrett's daughter practicing in the flight simulator. The young woman who had once been ashamed of her father was now proud of her own journey to make the world better. And that, Michelle thought, was the greatest transformation of all, when pain turns into purpose and purpose turns into progress.